There's a kind of silence that feels heavier than noise, thicker, like it's trying to smother you. That's the kind I felt sitting in my living room, watching the rain drizzle down the kitchen window, realizing I hadn't heard from Hollis in almost a week. She never went this long without a message, even just a meme, a gif, something dumb to lighten the mood. But the last thing I got from her was an emoji, a damn emoji. 7 days ago, a simple smiley face that now felt more like a warning. It was strange the way I noticed, not through panic or instinct, just a gap in routine. I'm a man of habit, 42, divorced, no kids, and I work from home doing medical billing. It's as dull as it sounds, but it pays the rent and lets me keep people at arm's length. She was always the opposite. Hollis was lightning in a jar, loud, brilliant, chaotic, and beloved. The kind of person you notice when she walks in a room. I was the one you forgot was already there. Funny how the ones who go unnoticed are the ones expected to notice everything. I tried to brush it off. Maybe she was traveling. Maybe she needed space. I told myself not to make it a thing, but the silence sat with me, and it sat heavy. I called, straight to voicemail. Again, still full. I texted the family group chat. Has anyone heard from Hollis? Mom replied, she's probably off the grid again, LOL. Dad sent a thumbs up emoji, and my cousin Marie said, she's always like this. They meant well, but none of them got it. This wasn't like her. She might ghost a date, sure, or forget a lunch, but she checked in, always. And once again, it was me driving out, checking on things, playing the concerned brother role no one seemed to value until something actually happened. Hollis lived in the Highlands, a quiet part of Louisville with old brick buildings and quirky cafes. Her apartment sat on the second floor of a duplex she rented from an old couple who barely left their porch. I parked across the street. Her porch light was still on, in the middle of the day. That bothered me more than it should have. Her mail overflowed the box. Flyers curled with moisture, a grocery receipt pinned to the door with a thumbtack. Her car was there. I knocked, waited, knocked again. Nothing. One of the neighbors, an older woman walking her dog, paused. She hasn't been around this week, I think, she said. Usually hear her music through the walls. That did it. I pulled out the spare key Hollis gave me years ago, back when she locked herself out twice in 1 week. She laughed then, said, just in case, but you'll never need it. I hesitated at the door. My hand lingered on the knob longer than it should have. Inside it was off. Not messy, not clean, just off. Groceries sat rotting in the tote bag by the kitchen. The fridge hummed too loudly. The TV was on, stuck in static, the kind that buzzes just under your skin. One lamp glowed in the living room, her favorite, tall with a stained glass shade. She always said it made her feel like the place had soul. No sign of her, no bags packed, no note, nothing. Her cat Beans didn't greet me. His food was untouched. That's when I felt it, not just concern, but fear. Then I heard it, scratching, faint, slow. From the hallway closet, my chest tightened. I told myself it was probably nothing. A mouse, old pipes. But the sound kept going, like something alive. I walked down the hall, each step sinking deeper into that gut-level dread you can't explain. The air felt thicker, smelled like lavender and metal. Something clashing, unnatural. The closet door creaked when I touched it. I pulled it open. Nothing. No one. Just coats, boxes, shadows that didn't sit quite right. And then something dropped. A photo. It fell from the top shelf, landing face up. Me and Hollis. Taken years ago on her birthday. She was laughing, holding a sparkler. I was beside her, awkward, trying to smile. Only, my face was scratched out. 3 deep gouges through my eyes. I didn't breathe, just stared. That photo hadn't been like that before. Someone had been inside, after she disappeared. I didn't move at first. The photo rested in my hand like it carried weight beyond paper. I turned it over. The handwriting wasn't hers. Small, sharp letters scratched across the back. You shouldn't have come. That was it. No name, no date. The smell from the closet got worse. Damp wood, something sweet but sickly underneath, like perfume left open too long. The kind older women wore when we were kids, powdery and dense. It filled my nose and stuck to the back of my throat. Outside, the thunder rumbled like a warning. The living room light flickered once, twice, then steadied. The air felt charged, like the storm was inside now. I stood still for a beat, then got to work. I moved slow, careful. The kitchen drawers had been pulled open, a few utensils scattered. Hollis's favorite coffee mug, blue with chipped glaze, was shattered on the counter. It hadn't fallen. It had been slammed. I looked around. No laptop, no phone. Her purse was missing, but her keys were still in the bowl by the door. None of this was normal. I pulled out my phone and dialed the non-emergency number for the police. Louisville Metro, what's your emergency? It's not an emergency, my sister's missing. Her apartment looks wrong. What do you mean by wrong, sir? I paused. They always need you to explain things that can't be explained. I mean, someone's been here. Things are out of place. She hasn't contacted anyone in a week. Her cat was locked in a closet. Has she gone missing before? No, she's not that type. A sigh on the line. You're welcome to file a missing persons report. It takes 24 hours for adults. I'm not asking you to look for her tonight. I'm telling you something happened here. Do you see any sign of forced entry? No, but this isn't right. They said they'd make a note. That's all. I hung up. Family chat was no better. My message, this is serious. She's not here. Her place was disturbed, was met with more of the same. She's probably just decompressing, you know how she is. She's a grown woman, not your job to babysit. You're overreacting again. You can't wake someone who's pretending to sleep. That's what I typed. No one responded. I turned off the group, let them ignore me. I wasn't leaving. I made a decision to stay. Her apartment felt different now. Not like home, but like a shell. Something waiting to be filled again or cleared out. I walked into her bedroom. A chair was tipped on its side like it had been kicked. A single high-heeled shoe was under the bed, pointed toward the wall. On the dresser, I saw the torn corner of an envelope. Legal grade, thick, with faint letters still visible. Ian Company. It didn't take much to fill in the blank. Cassian, our family lawyer, the one who handled Dad's business, the one we weren't supposed to ask about. I sat on the edge of her bed and started putting it all together. This wasn't random. She didn't run. Someone came here. Someone who knew what they were doing. Maybe I was invisible so long they thought I'd never look closer. Then the scratching came again. This time louder, slow, measured. I didn't freeze. I grabbed the heavy flashlight from the nightstand and headed back toward the closet. I opened it quick. There he was. Beans, her cat, huddled in the corner, eyes wide, shaking, no collar, just fur matted near the neck. I scooped him up gently, and that's when I saw it. Beneath him, barely tucked into the corner, a folded map. A property outline, old, yellowed at the edges, one spot circled in red, a date scribbled in ink, last Thursday. Same day Hollis vanished. It was our family's property, just outside the county. Dad bought it years ago and never talked about it. So this wasn't random. Someone wanted her there, or wanted something from there. I stood up. I'd waited long enough. You get tired of waiting for someone else to save the people you love, I muttered to myself. More truth than I expected to feel in the moment. I snapped photos of everything. The shoe, the envelope, the map. I secured Beans in his carrier, locked the door behind me. If someone came back, they'd know someone had been here, but not who. Not yet. The rain was coming down now, heavy and hard, slicking the sidewalks and muting the world. I stepped out, cat carrier in one hand, map in my back pocket. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. No caller ID. A text. Don't go there. No punctuation. No option to reply. The message just hung on my screen like a threat or a warning. I stood there under the rain, the screen lighting up my face, heart pounding. Someone knew I had the map. Someone knew I was going. The next morning came quicker than I expected. I didn't sleep. I sat on Hollis's couch all night, listening to the creaks in her apartment and the occasional rumble of distant thunder rolling out over the city. When daylight started breaking through the blinds, I packed what little I had, cat secured, map folded, and drove. I didn't even stop for coffee. Louisville faded fast behind me. The roads narrowed. Traffic thinned out until it was just me, two lanes, and the kind of fog that makes you question your eyesight. The farther I got from town, the quieter it got. Not just outside, but in my head, too. Thoughts weren't bouncing anymore. They settled, heavy and still. That land, It had belonged to our grandfather. Most of it was sold off when we were kids, except one plot, the one no one mentioned. It was like it slipped through family memory on purpose. And maybe it did. I remembered Hollis once dared me to sneak into the house on that land. I was 10, maybe. She laughed and said, "Bet you won't." And she was right, I didn't. Some doors stay closed for a reason. I parked the car just off the dirt path. Tires crackled over loose gravel. The air was wet, full of pine and mold. Even before I opened the door, I felt something wasn't right, the kind of wrong you feel in your teeth. The house stood crooked against the gray sky. Half the roof had collapsed in on itself. Weeds climbed the siding. One shutter hung limp, swinging slightly even without wind. I stepped out. No birds, no crickets, just quiet so thick it pressed against my ears. The front door wasn't locked. It creaked open with barely a touch. Inside smelled like rot and time. Wallpaper peeled off in long curls. Wood floors bowed under my steps. I moved slow. Someone had been here. Food wrappers scattered near the fireplace. Crumpled newspapers, one dated 5 days ago. Water bottles, a blanket rolled up in the corner. Not old, fresh. Someone was using this place. On the kitchen table, I found it, a note. Scribbled fast but unmistakably in Hollis's handwriting. I was right, it's all connected. Next to it, a Polaroid. My heart jumped. It was our parents. Standing in front of this same house, same chipped siding, same front steps. Dated 1997. But they always told us we'd never been out here, claimed the land was worthless, that they sold it before we were born. Why lie? Why erase this place? I stepped into the master bedroom and froze. The closet. It looked exactly like the one in Hollis's apartment. Same wooden slats, same brass knob. I couldn't make sense of it. And then I remembered. I was maybe 7. They were fighting again, loud, doors slamming. I ran and hid in a closet. I remember the smell. I remember the dark. I remember something else. There was a door inside that closet. My hands moved before I could stop them. I dropped to my knees, pressed against the back wall. The wallpaper peeled easily. Beneath it, a small handle, rusted, but there. I pulled. Behind it, a crawl space. Dust thick as velvet. I slid inside. Boxes, papers, a tin box filled with old keys, rolled up maps, legal documents with county stamps and signatures, most too faded to read. Then I found the envelope. My sister's name, Hollis, written in our mother's handwriting, unopened. I sat back on my heels, holding it like it might burn. I knew I shouldn't, but I opened it. "Baby girl," it started. "There are things I never told you, things I never forgave myself for. We made a deal, your father and I, to protect you both." The rest blurred. She didn't say what the deal was, but her words were thick with regret, like someone who'd buried something too deep to dig up again. Sometimes the answers aren't hidden. They're just buried beneath the version of love we were told to believe in. I leaned back against the wall. The ceiling above creaked. A slow drip fell somewhere behind me. Rain had started again. Or maybe it never stopped. She didn't come here to hide. She came to uncover something, and maybe someone didn't want her to. I thought about calling the cops again, but the image of that dispatcher brushing me off stopped me. Evidence like this? It'd disappear before it hit the system. I grabbed the documents I could carry, stuffed them into my bag, tucked the letter inside my jacket. As I stepped back out into the living room, a photo caught my eye, on the floor, just inside the front door. It was another picture of me and Hollis, but this time, her face had been scratched out, not mine. I held it in my palm until it bent. Driving away, the rain came harder. The house disappeared behind a curtain of gray. But then, in the rearview mirror, a figure, standing in the upstairs window. I slammed the brakes, tires skidded. I looked back. Window empty. I wasn't sure anymore if I was chasing clues or being dragged along by them. I left the old house with a cold sweat clinging to my neck. My fingers gripped the documents like they might dissolve if I loosened up. As I stepped outside, the rain started in a slow, steady patter that didn't soak but reminded you it wasn't going anywhere. I pulled the hood of my jacket up and walked to the car, hearing every footstep echo against the wet gravel like it didn't want me to leave. On the drive back into Louisville, I stayed off the main highways. My mind was racing, my hands clenched around the wheel like they had something to prove. I passed by the Locke Law Building, its sleek glass facade looking like it had nothing to hide, but I knew better. Cassian's words played in my head. Family means silence. And I knew now silence was never innocence. It was a place you stuffed the rot and hoped it didn't smell. I didn't plan to stop, but I did. Something inside me knew I couldn't keep chasing shadows if I didn't check the bones they buried in broad daylight. The receptionist at the front desk looked me over like I was a stranger who spoke out of turn. "You need an appointment." I didn't move. "I'm looking into deed records." "That requires approval." "I'm family." She blinked, bored. "You still need clearance." I felt the pressure building behind my eyes. I didn't raise my voice. "I'm not leaving without seeing those records." That's when I heard it. Down a hallway, faint, but clear enough to punch through the hum of conversation. "You buried her too deep." It wasn't just the words, it was the voice. Eudora, smooth, educated, always a half step above everybody else in the room. I turned. She was in a corner office behind the glass. She looked up. Our eyes met. Her mouth went tight. She closed the blinds. She was supposed to be out of state. She told the family she was traveling for a case. I didn't say a word. Just stood there, jaw tight, while the receptionist muttered something into her headset. "She hides not just in the shadows of this house, but in her own lies." I walked down the hallway like I belonged there. That's how I got into places they didn't want me. Act like you're already supposed to be inside. The filing room was locked, but I'd done this before. Years of being underestimated made me good at slipping past gatekeepers. Found a terminal. Ran a temporary access override. It wasn't magic, it was just knowing the system better than they thought I did. I found what I was looking for in the back drawer. Lock Estate Amendments 2005-2010. There was dust on the folder like nobody had dared to pull it in years. Inside, I read the entries one by one. Then I stopped cold. Loan guarantee signed by Hollis Locke, unauthorized signature. I blinked. Again. There was a clause redacted, but not completely. Transfer clause executed if beneficiary disputes terms. They'd backed her into a corner, made her name a pawn. If she'd pushed back, everything could have been taken from her. And Maris, she was part of it too. Somewhere, someone had used her name as leverage. I leaned against the file cabinet. My knees wouldn't stop shaking. They didn't just lie to us, they used us. Used our names like spare keys to a safe we didn't know existed. Rain tapped harder against the windows outside. I grabbed what I could. Copies, notes, anything I could fit in my satchel, and walked out. If they can misuse her name, they can misuse me too. I didn't trust the system. Not after what I just saw. I called Dorian. He picked up fast. Still had that breathless way of speaking like he was always waiting for the next lie to collapse. "I need you to look into some records," I said. "The financials around Hollis. You remember those deals Cassian roped her into?" Long pause. Then, "You think they forged something?" "I know they did." He didn't argue. "Send me what you've got." I told him to meet me. We picked a coffee shop we used to go to. Nothing fancy. Somewhere quiet. The streetlights flickered on as I pulled into the parking lot. The rain had eased up, but the wind was sharp. I walked inside, spotted Dorian already seated, hands wrapped around a chipped mug. I sat across from him, pulled out the folder, and opened it between us. That's when I saw it. Tucked inside, between two pages I hadn't touched before, a photo, Hollis, younger, standing in front of the legacy property, holding a blueprint, the same map I'd found in her closet. But it wasn't the map that hit me. It was her face. She was smiling. Not just happy, smiling like she saw the end from the beginning, like none of this surprised her. I slid the photo across to Dorian. Why did she look so calm? He didn't answer right away, just stared at the photo. And then I understood. She wasn't running. She was preparing. I sat in the center of my apartment, surrounded by a mess that didn't feel like mine anymore. The documents were spread out like a crime scene. Photos, scanned files, scribbled notes, each one louder than the last. I hadn't slept, not even a minute. My eyes burned, but my brain wouldn't shut off. Hollis's photo, the one where she held the map and smiled like she'd already buried the ending, stared at me from the table. That expression. Calm, calculated, not fear, not even warning. Like she was telling me, It's your move now. When the truth starts sounding like fiction, you're too close to it. I questioned if I was helping her or just dragging what little piece she had into the light so others could tear it apart. I hated the idea that I might be the one exploiting her story. People will do anything for family, or to protect what family means to them. I got up, grabbed my keys, and drove across town. Dorian was already there, the Greenhouse Cafe. We used to come here with Hollis. It always felt too peaceful to be real, like it didn't belong in this world. Vines coiled around the beams, and the air smelled like thyme and soil. He sat at the same table, no greeting, just slid over his phone. She left me a voicemail, he said, barely above a whisper. 5 days ago. He hit play. If anything happens to me, check the blue folder behind my record shelf. Silence. Then her breath caught, like she wanted to say more but didn't. The message ended there. Dorian looked at me. I should have listened. Years ago, she told me something was off and about the estate, the family deals. I told her to drop it. Don't poke the beast, I said. I thought she was spiraling. He didn't need to finish that sentence. We both knew what it meant. I stood up without saying anything, drove straight to Hollis's apartment. The lock clicked like it knew I was coming back. The place was untouched, except now I saw it different. Less like her home, more like a vault. Behind the record shelf, exactly where she said, there it was. A blue folder. Dusty, taped shut. I peeled it open with shaking hands. Inside, forged financial documents, copies of bank transfers to Shell charities, a USB drive marked Play Me, and a draft email addressed to a journalist. Subject, Legacy is a lie. The voice memo played her voice again. Confident, angry, focused. They used the lock name as a brand. Cassian and Eudora moved money through fake nonprofits. They built an empire on guilt and secrets. If you're hearing this, I couldn't finish what I started. But maybe you can. At the bottom of the folder, her handwriting. If you found this, then I trusted you more than I feared them. That line broke something open in me. I sat there for a long time. If I went public, everything would fall. Cassian, Eudora, the Locke legacy. Hollis's name would get dragged through the mud with theirs. Or I could confront them directly, make them say it out loud. I thought about what Hollis once told me when she tried group therapy. Pain doesn't leave until it teaches you what it came for. I printed every piece of evidence, stored copies in the cloud, locked a flash drive in my safe. I wasn't leaving this to chance. Then I called Eudora, straight to voicemail. I know what you did. Meet me or I go public. No reply. But I saw the message was read. Later that evening, Dorian called. You sure you want to do this? This isn't about justice anymore, he said. This is survival. Sometimes, I told him, they're the same thing. I went home, didn't even take off my shoes. Just sat on the edge of the couch, head spinning, hands sore from gripping the steering wheel too tight. That's when I noticed the door, slightly ajar. I hadn't left it that way. I rushed in. Nothing broken, nothing missing. Except the blue folder was gone, all of it, the USB, the files. And even the envelope with her handwriting, everything, except for one page, lying flat on the floor near the window, my mother's handwriting. We did what we had to. I walked into my apartment and froze. The door frame was scratched, the lock looked tampered. Nothing was missing, except the blue folder. Every other document, every printout, every memory-laced scrap I had painstakingly collected, gone. It left me exposed, vulnerable. I stood there for a long moment, silent, ears pounding, waiting for someone to come back and take the rest. I grabbed my coat, stuffed the small evidence I'd kept in my jacket pockets, USB, a torn note, and drove to the sheriff's office. They listened politely, took a report, called it a random burglary, acted like they believed in coincidences. I watched the detective's eyes flicker when I used the name Locke. No urgency, no investigation, just forms. Sometimes the silence from authorities says more than words ever could. It hit me. I'd underestimated how deep this ran. This wasn't about Hollis anymore. This was about legacy, reputation, and fear. The next morning, I got a call from the records clerk. Her voice was low, hesitant. She said she'd discovered a sealed file in the archives marked "Do Not Pursue." It was tied to a missing person report Hollis filed 3 months back, never followed up. Inside, her restraining order request against Cassian, rejected by a judge, signed. The clerk whispered that Hollis had cried in a hallway when it was denied. She had been fighting quietly for months. She wasn't just reacting, she was preparing. I felt a hollow inside me. All that time I thought I was catching up. She was running ahead. She never asked for help with words, but maybe she'd been begging in silence. I drove to Hollis's off-site storage unit using the access code she once offhandedly mentioned to me on a call. A gray sedan sat parked nearby, windows dark, engine off, too calm. I slipped inside and found the unit packed with boxes, old furniture, and cardboard files labeled in handwriting I didn't recognize. One box said "Summer Files." Inside were journals, letters, a hard drive with sticky labels, and correspondences between Hollis and a national investigative reporter. On the bottom shelf, an old flip phone. I charged it. 2 unread texts. "You're in over your head. Stop. We know who you're talking to." My blood went cold. Someone had been watching her, and now was watching me. Driving away, I replayed every moment. The insurance claim for her apartment. The police shrug, Dorian's hesitation, the call to the clerk, the vanishing folder. They'd constructed the trap so carefully, so subtly. Maybe I hadn't stumbled in. Maybe I'd been led. A car appeared behind me, tailing for 3 blocks. My stomach clenched. I took a detour. Threw my cell in my lap. I remembered Hollis's words. They never hide things in the dark. They bury it in plain sight and dare you to dig. She wasn't afraid of what they hid. She knew where to start. Now I had to finish it. Or I'd never see daylight again. That night when my phone rang, the voice was barely more than static. Then it spoke. "You've made it this far. Now let's see if you survive what comes next." My pulse hit my throat. I stared at the ceiling, heart hammering. They've stopped warning me. Now they want to silence me. I paced that rental apartment like a man trying to outwalk his own thoughts. The safe house wasn't much, bare walls, squeaky floorboards, curtains too thin, but it was the only place left where I didn't feel watched. At least not yet. Every document I had was spread out across the table, voice memos playing on loop. I kept rewinding Hollis's last few messages, hoping I'd missed something, hoping there was one more breadcrumb tucked between syllables. I called Sylvia. She didn't answer at first. When she finally picked up, her voice was a whisper. Tired, scared. "I can't get involved, Rem. You know what they'll do to me." "You're already involved," I said. "So is your son. So's everyone carrying their last name." I heard her exhale. "What do you want?" "Leak the story. Quietly. I'll send you the file. Use the reporter Hollis trusted. Marisol's going to track movements at the estate. You sure you're ready for this?" I didn't answer. Before hanging up, I muttered, "Truth is a seed, but it needs light to root." That night, I noticed my apartment door had been left ajar, not broken, just nudged open enough to be a message. They wanted me to know I had no walls left. I stayed up until midnight. Couldn't sleep. Pulled out an old box from my childhood, something I hadn't touched in decades. Inside were old photos, most still intact. Then I found one. Me, Hollis, and our parents. But her face had been scratched out. Recently. Not by accident. I sat down slowly. That wasn't neglect. That was intent. My memory rewound, back to the backyard behind our house. Hollis digging under the dogwood tree. Our mother's voice sharp behind her. "Be careful what you dig up, Hollis. Some things don't want to be found." I used to think that was just about the yard. Now I wasn't so sure. The next day came like a verdict. Dorian texted me mid-morning. "They know. Don't go to the gala." I went anyway. Locke Estate held its annual gala like clockwork. Lavish, shiny, full of smiling rot. I showed up in a suit that no longer fit my skin, something I hadn't worn since before the truth started bleeding through. They scanned my invitation and turned me away. "Private event," the man said. like I hadn't grown up on those steps. I found another way in. Always had. The side door by the guest kitchen still had the latch problem Hollis and I used to joke about. Inside, the air smelled like wealth and well-buried sins. Cassian was in the atrium, grinning with the police chief. My mother stood nearby, clutching a champagne flute like it held her dignity. They were locking down power in public view. That's how men like Cassian do it, grin while twisting the knife. I didn't walk into that room. I stood outside the circle watching him hold court. I could feel it in my chest, rage, grief, resolve. I reached into my coat, pulled out the flash drive, slid it into the USB slot behind the directory monitor in the foyer, files from the blue folder. The truth, I turned to leave. Sir, you can't exit that way. Security had blocked all but the main door. My pulse picked up. Then alarms. Screens lit up across the estate's network, the foyer directory, guest monitors, even the scrolling banner by the main staircase. One line, dirty truths of the Locke legacy. Cassian's face blinked on the screen, smiling, then cut to Hollis's picture, her face scratched out just like the one I found. Gasps. A few dropped glasses. My mother's eyes searched the crowd, and then every head turned toward me. The night's chaos blurred behind me as I sped away from the gala, screens flickering, gasps in hallways, Cassian's face plastered on monitors as the empire I never asked for cracked under its own lies. I drove past city lights toward darkness, heart pounding, adrenaline in every breath. Then my phone buzzed. No ID, a burner message. If you want answers, come alone. 1:30 a.m., church. I stared at it. Yes, absolutely yes. This was the crossroads. I pulled over, loaded my gear, flashlight, phone, backup recorder, hidden wire mic. I told no one. Not Sylvia, not Marisol. They'd already dodged too much. Into the woods I went, headlights slicing through fog, roads narrowed, branches scratching the car roof. Every mile away from town felt like stepping off a ledge. I asked myself, what if this was all to silence me too? But I kept driving. When I arrived at the church, it looked abandoned. Windows boarded, steps crumbling. The kind of place people forget until someone drags history out. Inside, candles flickered though, not lit. Elaine stood waiting, hands shaking, box held close. She confessed in a low voice. The Locke family covered up something terrible 20 years ago. Cassian, our family. We lost someone. He hid it all. She passed me a letter Hollis wrote, in case I disappear. Inside, Hollis outlined every lie, every shady transaction, every betrayal. It wasn't negligence, it was silence by design. My chest felt tight. This was bigger than I imagined. Elaine handed me a USB hidden in a hollow Bible. I plugged it in, voice trembling. On the recording, Hollis said, "If you're hearing this, they got to me. But they'll never stop all of us." That line hit me like a punch. She had set this up, backups in 3 separate locations. The church was just one. She knew the risk. She planned for failure. Tears came, not from weakness, but from the weight I'd carried alone. I didn't wait. I uploaded every file, documents, audio, emails to outlets across the country. Encrypted, timed release. I called Marisol and Sylvia. Told them to disappear for a while. Sitting in my car, engine idling, I breathed. I accepted what was coming. The world would see. Not just what Cassian stole, but who we are. As I drove past the tree line, a figure lurked under a tree, watched me, knew I'd found the grave and opened it. My phone buzzed again. Unlisted number. "You opened the grave. Now let's bury you in it." I smiled. They had no idea who just woke up. The courthouse steps buzzed with press vans and long lenses, but I walked through them like mist. The files I released did more than shake headlines. They cracked a foundation that once felt untouchable. Local stations were eating it up. National anchors circled like hawks. For the first time in decades, the Locke name was being said out loud, not with reverence, but with suspicion. Cassian didn't make it far. Tried to fly out of Nashville under a false identity. They got him boarding, cuffed like the predator he'd always been beneath the suits. I watched the footage quietly at a diner that next morning. He looked surprised. Maybe he really believed he'd get away with it again. Inside the grand jury room, I sat alone under fluorescent lights. I told them everything. My voice didn't shake. Not because I wasn't scared, but because fear no longer had power over me. When they played the voicemail from Hollis, not a soul breathed. The judge ordered her death report unsealed. 21 pages they tried to keep hidden. Not anymore. What they tried to bury, we brought into the light. Later that day, as I stepped out for air, a young paralegal handed me an envelope. "She asked for this to go to you," he said. It was from Hollis. Dated over a year ago. Inside was a single deed, the Locke estate, her signature, witnessed, stamped. The land had been hers all along, transferred quietly through an old trust to keep it safe from the family. There was also a note. "If I don't make it, don't let this place rot. Turn it into something better." I drove out that afternoon. The estate looked worse than I remembered. Roof caved in, charred walls still stained from the fire. But beneath the ruin, something held, something steady. I stood there for a long time, imagining not what it was, but what it could become. A women's shelter, a nonprofit center. Hollis's name carved into stone not as a victim, but a guardian. The place had been her prison. Maybe now it could be someone else's refuge. That evening, Sylvia and I met for coffee. The tension between us finally broke. She talked, I listened, I talked. She cried, and we both sat there, older, tired, honest. "I should have said something," she whispered. "We all should have," I replied. Marisol called in. She was heading back to Tennessee with her boys. "I'm done pretending this family deserves me," she said. I smiled. She was free. Back home, I opened my phone one last time. There was a folder, threats, unknown numbers, recordings. I hovered over it, then deleted it. That part of the war was done. That night, I visited the cemetery alone. I laid the estate's key and the old locket on Hollis's grave. "She never stopped fighting," I said, looking up at the wind-tossed trees. "Now, neither will I." I read softly, "Do not be daunted by the enormity of the world's grief. Do justly, now." Then I walked away. The sun wasn't up yet, but the sky was beginning to shift. At the car, my phone buzzed. One last message. "You've inspired more than you know." I laughed gently. Then I've already won. And if you're watching this, maybe it's your turn now. To speak, to fight, to heal,